Now, before we move on to Homo sapiens, I just want to revisit one last time the Neanderthals, or Homo neanderthalensis. These are recreations of what Neanderthals likely might have looked like: a man, a woman, and a Neanderthal child. As you can see, they look very similar to Homo sapiens, with a slightly more predominant brow and a little bit difference in overall skull shape. But as I mentioned, Homo neanderthalensis likely bred with Homo sapiens. We have lots of evidence for this, but probably some of the most predominant and convincing evidence is the fact that there are some people alive today that still have Neanderthal DNA in their genome. So what kind of DNA did we get from Neanderthals? Well, it turns out that we can actually analyze the DNA that's found in modern humans and see what DNA survived from Neanderthals and what did not. Neanderthals provided DNA to Homo sapiens that altered our skin tone, likely a result of the fact that Neanderthals lived in very northerly latitudes, meaning a very dramatic reduction in sun exposure. Sun exposure is really important for vitamin D production in the body, and lighter skin tone allows for greater sunlight absorption by the human body, which allows for vitamin D conversion. In addition, it's possible that Neanderthals provided DNA to modern humans that allowed for the development of language. There's also a certain amount of DNA that was provided to Homo sapiens from Neanderthals that increased the immune system, changed the way that we metabolize energy and digest food, for brain function, sperm production, and also altered our upper body anatomy, increasing the size of the rib cage and the cranium. All of this DNA is only found in individuals with Neanderthal DNA still left in their genetic information. And this would only include individuals from Europe, because that's where Neanderthals were thought to have bred with Homo sapiens. Individuals that descend directly from Homo sapiens that evolved in Africa would not have these Neanderthal DNA traits. That is why people in Europe and Asia today have roughly 1 to 4% of their DNA from Neanderthals. But people from other parts of the world, like the Americas, Australia, and Africa, don't have Neanderthal DNA. As Neanderthals migrated around the world, they ended up evolving into other species, including a unique subspecies or species, Homo floresiensis. Homo floresiensis is a pygmy or reduced species found specifically in an island around Indonesia, Flores. This is in between the Indian and Pacific Ocean. Homo floresiensis is what many people refer to as pygmies today, and they are human species that are smaller in stature and shorter in height as compared to the Homo sapien species. This is fairly common for when mammals end up on islands for them to diminish in size and stature, which is why we've seen in the past the evolution of pygmy elephants and other versions of smaller mammals. Elephants are great swimmers and can swim long distances in the ocean. And some of these elephants end up on islands in the Pacific. There, they evolved into pygmy elephants. Homo floresiensis isn't just unique in the fact that it's shorter and smaller in stature, but it also, much like Neanderthals, ate primarily meat. It lived only 95,000 years ago to roughly 13,000 years ago, so for a very short period of time, and is the most recently evolved of the Homo species. although as you can see, it no longer exists today. It is still seen in the DNA of some of the Homo sapiens species as the pygmy people on some of these islands today. Let's continue to start talking about Homo sapiens and their migration around the world. Homo sapiens, as I mentioned, evolved roughly 200,000 years ago. That's indicated by anthropological and fossil evidence found in sub-Saharan Africa. From there, Homo sapiens migrated roughly 130 to 170,000 years ago to South Africa, and then after that, north, through the Middle East and into Asia. This occurred roughly 60 to 70,000 years ago. So first, Homo sapiens migrated south, and then they migrated north. This would have followed the migration patterns of previous Homo species, like Homo erectus. Eventually, roughly 40 to 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens migrated to Europe. There they would have encountered Homo neanderthalensis. In addition, they continued to migrate north through Asia, encountering the Denisovans there, and possibly another species of the Homo genus that had migrated out of Africa earlier. They continued migrating through Asia, hitting Australia 70,000 years ago, which I think is quite astonishing, considering that they would have had to sail across vast oceans and through the islands in order to get there. Homo sapiens didn't stop there. They continued to migrate east through Asia, eventually crossing over the Bering Land Bridge, covered in ice at the time, into North America, and then down into South America, eventually reaching the southern tip of South America roughly 12 to 15,000 years ago. They also migrated roughly 15,000 years ago, again crossing oceans and ice to get to North America from Europe. All of this is evidenced by anthropological evidence, remains that humans left behind, and also, interestingly, by DNA evidence. We can analyze the migration patterns of the Homo species, specifically Homo sapiens, by looking at our DNA. Now, the problem with looking at the total cumulative amount of DNA is that you could have inbreeding, or interbreeding, I should say, between Homo neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens, or the Denisovans and Homo sapiens, or various groups of Homo sapiens. You need to have one way of analyzing a lineage of DNA without having it mixed up between mother and father. And that's where the advent of using mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome comes in. Mitochondrial DNA is DNA found inside the organelle of the cell known as the mitochondrion. As we learned from our first lecture, DNA is found inside the nucleus of every single one of our cells. But one thing I didn't mention is that DNA is also found inside your mitochondria. Your mitochondria is a separate compartment inside every single one of your cells and is responsible for converting sugar into usable energy for the cell, which is why many people refer to it as the powerhouse of the cell. But one of the other characteristics of mitochondria is that it contains DNA. What's unique about mitochondrial DNA is that because it's an organelle, mitochondrial DNA is only given to you from your mother. Your father, the sperm, only carries half of the nucleus DNA, whereas the mother contributes half of the nucleus DNA plus all of the organelles to her offspring. So you actually inherited all of your organelles from your mom. That includes your mitochondria. So every person alive today has obtained their mitochondrial DNA from their mom, who acquired it from their mom, and so forth. This DNA is not mixed. It's transmitted perfectly linearly from mother to offspring, mother to mother to mother to mother. This led scientists to be able to go back and analyze how many different types of DNA we have. And it turns out that there are roughly 7 or 8 different types of mitochondrial DNA that exist in the Homo sapiens species. These 7 or 8 different types of mitochondrial DNA are now referred to as the mitochondrial Eve, because it's thought that the very first Homo sapiens that evolved roughly 200,000 years ago came from just roughly half a dozen different female lineages in the sub-Saharan African region at this time. Now we can do that with mitochondrial DNA and trace the female lineage, but we can also do that with the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome is passed only from father to sons. Much like the mitochondrial DNA, which is passed from mother to children, the Y chromosome is unaltered and not mixed with generations. And so we can look and analyze the Y chromosome DNA that's not mixed and see how long ago the male lineage evolved from Homo sapiens. Looking at this, it appears that the male Homo sapien lineage actually evolved a little bit earlier, roughly 300 to 350,000 years ago, and was fairly unchanged for when Homo sapiens eventually evolved. And this analysis indicates again that humans evolved from a very small number of organisms in sub-Saharan Africa. Eventually, of course, they interbred with other Homo species or subspecies in different parts of Asia and Europe, but they did come from a small group of Homo sapiens initially. In the next and final section, we'll be talking about where human evolution has recently taken us and where it's likely to take us in the future.